All right, we'll try that again. Good morning, guys. Welcome to the team. Welcome back after a week off for Thanksgiving break. Everybody looks healthy, maybe a tad plumper. No, I'm just kidding. You guys look great. Let me go over schedule. This is week 10 out of 25 this year, and our schedule, we don't have any more weeks off. We're going to go straight through December. We meet today, which is December 1st. We meet the 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd. Sometimes we take that last Friday off before Christmas, but we're gonna meet this year. If you're in town, join us the 22nd, and then we're off the Friday after Christmas. So the Friday between Christmas and New Year's will be off, and then we'll start up again in January. So I'll send you all that schedule in an email so you know. But we're going today and the next 3 weeks right through until December 22nd. We also have something coming up. Today's the first time I'm going to announce our upcoming couples event, which is called Just Us. That's going to be January the 20th, so make a mental note, reserve the date. This is our biannual, every 2 years we have these events, which is for all married couples, any age, even from engagement on. We filled the room 2 years ago when we did it with my brother and his wife. We sold out, so you might want to go online. We've had people registering already, over 50 people are already registered, and it's not until January. So it's on our chapelstreetchurch.com website. This year, we're going to present that evening with Jeff and Erin Frazier. So put the next picture up. And who would not want to hear this handsome set of couples talk to you about marriage? But we're going to have a fun time. If you've been to those events before, we try to arrange them so they're lots of fun. We use movie clips. It's a lot like Team, only with a little more decorations and stuff to make the women comfortable and make them happy. But the key to it is it's a fun night. Marriages are encouraged. Your wife will really enjoy it, and that's the whole point, right? She has a good time, and anytime you pay attention to marriage, it's good for you. So I'll have more information coming up. It only costs $10, but I'll have more information starting next week, maybe even with some little tickets you can get as a stocking stuffer, because if you think of it first, you get extra credit. If she brings it up, it's okay, but if you bring it up, you get extra credit. So we'll talk more about that in the time coming up. So here's our story for today. Woman gets on a bus in a city with her 2-month-old baby. The bus driver looks up at her and says, "Lady, I'm sorry, but that's got to be the ugliest baby I've ever seen." The woman, of course, is deeply offended, and she stomps to the back of the bus and sits down, fuming the whole way. Eventually, a guy sits down next to her, and she says to the guy, "That driver just insulted me terribly." The man says, "That's awful. You go right back up there and tell him off. Now, let me hold your monkey for you." That was actually voted the funniest joke of the year a couple years ago. I don't think I'd give it justice there. Today we're talking about session 10 today. We're talking about how can I forgive? The question of forgiveness. Now I'm going to show you a movie clip from a movie called Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. Now, I'm not sure how I think of these movies, but a couple of my sons and I are big fans of the new Planet of the Apes movies. You know, the remakes of the late 60s, early 70s Planet of the Apes franchise with Charlton Heston and Roddy McDowall and all that. And the new ones, we really enjoy. I don't know why I like these movies, but I do. And so there's a conversation you're going to see in this movie between Caesar, who is the leader of the apes, of Ape Nation, and he's really an awesome leader. He's like my new hero in movies, is Caesar, this ape. And he's talking to his human friend Malcolm. And there's a war developing between the apes and the humans. And Caesar explains why that war has become inevitable. And it gets us to our theme today. So take a look at the clip.
You're not safe here. They made contact. All the people are coming. Soldiers. You have to leave now, everyone. Caesar, if you don't go, it'll be all-out war.
War has already begun. They started war. And human will not forgive. You must go before fighting.
thought we had a chance.
I did too.
I love Caesar. What a great character. And the visuals on those movies are just amazing, how they animate the ape's face and all. But the key lines I wanted you to see in that clip was when Caesar says, ape started war, human will not forgive. And then he says, I'm sorry, my friend. One of the most pervasive and difficult issues in all of human life, an issue that we see around us all the time, especially now it seems, and the issue that we see within us all the time is the issue of forgiveness. From the two Bulls players, Nico Mirotic and Bobby Portis, who got into a fight in practice a month and a half ago, and that's been in the news every day. Will they coexist? Will they forgive? Will they? To Matt Lauer and the women he allegedly approached inappropriately. We see the question of forgiveness all around us. And it's always been an issue. Not surprisingly, 2,000 years ago, Jesus talked a good bit about this issue of forgiveness. So I'm going to read to you this story out of Matthew's Gospel, Matthew chapter 18, and then we'll talk about it. It says, then Peter, one of the disciples, came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold, and hear me pause, some translations of the Bible will say 10,000 talents. A talent was a measure of weight, and in this case, it was a weight of gold. So this is a very, very unimaginably large amount of money. 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins, or 100 denarii, some translations will say. So it took 6,000 denarii to make 1 talent. Okay, the first guy owed 10,000 talents, or 10,000 times 6,000 denarii, and this is 100 denarii. So it's a vast difference. When people would have heard this story originally, they would have almost laughed out loud at this amount after they heard the first amount, just so you get perspective. And one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins, he grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called that servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Okay, Jesus was a master storyteller. If you read the Gospels, you know that. He loved to tell stories. And he used his stories to illustrate spiritual truths in a way that his listeners could understand sort of intuitively and that they could feel. That's why he told stories. So there are several things we glean from this story. In fact, this story, we could take weeks to talk about this one story. But the first thing I want to talk about is how forgiveness is both a decision and a process. It's a decision and a process. Years ago, as all of you know, my wife and I have 4 sons, and years ago, when they were all little, and these squabbles would break out in typical sort of brother ways. And one day, I was in a different room, and I vaguely hear something happen in another room, and suddenly one boy is crying bloody murder. So I run in to say, what happened, and the boy who's crying is pointing at his brother saying, he whacked me. Fighting over a toy or something, or a game, or wrestling or something, he whacked me. So I say to the brother who allegedly did the whacking, I look at him and say, because he looks guilty, I said, did you whack your brother? And he nods. So I'm thinking, good, I got a confession pretty quickly, so we're going to move this thing through. I say, is that the right thing to do? He shakes his head. That's also good. He recognizes that's not what he should do. And I say, what are you supposed to do? And he says, use my words. That's what we taught. You don't use your fists, you use your words. It's like, good, we're on track here. I say, that's right. Now what do you say to your brother? He looks at me and goes, I forgive you. Right idea, little wrong order. Says Peter came to Jesus and asked, how many times should I forgive my brother who sins against me? Up to 7 times? Jesus says, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Some translations here actually say 70 times 7 times. There's a confusion about the language. So it's either 77 times or 490 times, if I did my math right. So obviously, Jesus is not speaking literally here. He's actually using a very traditional rabbinical teaching method, which was hyperbole or exaggeration to make a point. So Peter's just asked, how many times should I forgive my brother? If he whacks me, or if he hurts me, or does something stupid or sinful, up to 7 times? Now we know from other parts in Scripture that Peter had a younger brother named Andrew, who was also a follower of Jesus. They were fishermen together. We could assume that Peter had other younger siblings as well. We don't know for sure. But we could assume that Peter and Andrew, like all brothers, had sibling conflict, that they got into it now and then, and that's probably on Peter's mind. And I'm pretty sure here that Peter, knowing Peter from the other parts of Scripture, Peter's pretty sure that he is doing a good job here, that he's doing a good thing, that he's getting it. He's the top student in the class. He's showing Jesus, hey, I think I'm understanding what you're all about. I think I'm getting the love your neighbor thing. I think I'm understanding this whole forgiveness thing. So should I forgive? Should I be willing to forgive all the way to 7 times? You hear it? I'm getting it, Jesus. I'm with you. I'm the top of the class. I'm getting really good at this discipleship thing. Should I forgive all the way to 7 times before I whack him upside the head? And then Jesus kind of blows him out of the water. He says, not 7 times, Peter, 77 times. In other words, you're not even close. You don't understand what I'm talking about yet. The point Jesus is making is this: there is no end to forgiveness. 2 reasons. First, because there's no end to the need to forgive, because people are sinful and selfish and eventually will say or do something that hurts you. People are sinful. There's no end to the need to forgive. And secondly, because forgiveness is both a decision and it's a process we go through again and again. Here's what I mean. First, we have to decide to forgive a wrong. If we wait to feel like forgiving, we'll never forgive. You decide first, and then you start the process. Now, God's forgiveness of us is instantaneous and complete. A God-like forgiveness. Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't even know what they're doing. He said that from the cross. He doesn't need a process to forgive, but human forgiveness, we need a process. We can't forgive. Rarely can we forgive immediately and completely. We have to practice the process of forgiveness. It's a decision and a process. Secondly, he's teaching us that forgiveness is always a gift. It's always a gift. Let me try to explain. Remember back, I think it was in August, sometime late summer, the whole tragedy that happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, when the guy drove his car through a bunch of people and killed some of them. Well, in the aftermath of that story, I noticed the mother of one of the young women who was killed in that attack. When she was interviewed, I remember she made some sort of statement like, I will never forgive the guy who drove the vehicle. I will never forgive, she said. So I was trying to look that up, her exact quote this past week. I wanted to remember the exact quote, so I was looking up. And when I looked on Google, did a search for I will never forgive, I found dozens and dozens and dozens of stories of people saying, I will not forgive. I will never forgive this or that. Now, I think most of us kind of resonate with that line, I will never forgive. If you saw the movie Revenant last year, a couple years ago, Leonardo DiCaprio, when the whole movie is about revenge, really. How he crawls on his hand, after he gets attacked by a bear, he's left for dead by a guy who's supposedly a friend, and he crawls on his hands and knees for miles and miles and miles, months and months and months, just to exact his revenge on this guy, and they both end up dying in the process, right? But there's something sort of satisfying about I will never forgive, because some things just don't seem forgivable. Every day, this morning, early in the morning, I'm going over stuff, I look at Twitter. 5 stories, at least, this morning on CBS Twitter feed of just horrific things. Children, crimes against children. And it feels sad. That's unforgivable. There's a kind of righteous and self-satisfying anger that just feels right. And if by that we mean that there's no way the offending person can ever deserve forgiveness, we're absolutely correct. We're right in that way. Forgiveness is never ever deserved. Furthermore, forgiveness can never be deserved or earned. But the problem is that anger, that rage that we feel in response eventually settles into our souls as bitterness. And bitterness is like toxic waste of the soul, and it seeps underground into every other part of our lives. Someone has said that bitterness is like drinking poison and waiting for someone else to die. So, how do we forgive? Back to Jesus' story. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him, and since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children, all that he had, be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. 3 things here. First, forgiveness can never be earned or deserved. The point of the 10,000 bags of gold part of Jesus' story, and the people living in the day would have immediately known, absolutely unpayable. It would take an average daily worker 20,000 years to pay back that amount of money in that culture. So he's like saying, you owe $10 billion. How are you going to pay that back? Unpayable. That's the point. Cannot be deserved or earned. You cannot take care of that debt. Secondly, forgiveness is always a gift. If it can't be earned or deserved, it must always be a gift. It says this master canceled the debt. And thirdly, forgiveness does not mean no consequences. Sometimes we think that, well, if I forgive this person for that or the other, it means they get away with it. It means I'm condoning it. No, that's not true. That's not a good understanding of forgiveness. I wasn't going to tell this story today, but I think I will. Several years ago, a lady approached me after church service, and she had her husband with her, and she told me she needed to forgive someone in her life. And that led to another conversation. That led to, just in a nutshell, the story was she was probably in her 70s at this time, and when she was a child, younger than 10 years old, her own father had molested her. Horrific. And for several years it went on. Nobody believed her, she couldn't tell anybody, and she carried that with her for 60 years. 60 years. And finally she says, with her husband, I have to forgive. How do I do it? Her father was long since dead and gone. He couldn't apologize. He could never do anything about it. She could never talk to him. How was she gonna forgive? Was it even possible? So we went through a process of naming what had happened, talking about it, the feelings, the rage, the pain, the shame, and all that. And eventually, through that process and understanding the resources God had given her and God's love for her, and God's forgiveness for her. Eventually, at the end of the whole process, she gathered up in a black garbage bag everything in her life that reminded her of those events, everything. And she brought it to me in a big garbage bag. And we ceremoniously threw it into a dumpster and sent that back to hell where it belonged. And she was free. She was free from that issue. So forgiveness does not mean forgetting, does not mean pretending something didn't happen. Quite the opposite. Forgiveness demands that sin be acknowledged. This happened. What you did was real. What you did or said hurt me. I have the right to exact payment. But because you can never repay what you owe, I choose to cancel the debt. See, the way I see it is, and this may not make sense to you, but forgiveness is refusing to carry another person's sin a single step further for them. It's giving it back to them. Does that make sense? Here's the backpack of pain. I'm not carrying this anymore. I give it back to you. I release it. I give it back to you, and I give you back to God, because that's where it belongs. Forgiveness is a process, and it's always a gift. Thirdly, forgiveness is always costly. It's always costly. I saw a story a couple weeks ago, just a random story about a guy named Wilbert Jones. When he was 19 years old, he was arrested on suspicion of abducting a nurse from a Baton Rouge hospital and raping her behind a building in 1971. He was 19. He was convicted of aggravated rape and spent 45 years in prison. 45 years. Eventually, through one of these foundations that investigates these things, it was discovered that the charges against him were trumped up and false, and that police had withheld evidence that would have exonerated him because they needed to get a conviction. 45 years. When he was released, he was asked by a reporter if he harbored resentment against the authorities who withheld evidence in his case all those years ago, and here's what he said: "I forgave and I forgive." Jones said, citing his faith in God for giving him hope during his incarceration and helping him focus on the future. See, forgiveness is not natural. That's not natural. Forgiveness is a decision. It's a process. It's always a gift, and it's costly. Forgiveness cost Wilbur Jones the natural and very human desire to exact revenge, to make someone pay. For someone to be forgiven, for sin to be forgiven, someone pays. Either the sinner pays, tries to repay that debt, 10,000 bags of gold, or the sinned against pays by canceling the debt. In Jesus' story, one man forgives 10,000 bags of gold. That means he just absorbed the debt, effectively paying for it himself. The other man refuses to forgive 100 silver coins. And then Jesus makes this profound and disturbing connection between one's willingness to forgive and one's ability to experience forgiveness. What he says essentially is that refusing to forgive, being unwilling to forgive, is like locking yourself in a torture chamber in prison and staying there. So, this story, of course, is a picture of the gospel. It's a picture of what we believe about the gospel. And until we understand where we are in the story, we don't understand what Jesus is saying. Where are we in the story? I think we are the guy who owes 10,000 bags of gold. I think all of us, Jesus is saying, owe a debt before God that we can never, ever repay. We can never earn or deserve our forgiveness. The price God paid for my forgiveness, for your forgiveness, is the cross. The price he paid is the cross. The point of the story is, if we've received the gift of God's forgiveness, if our 10,000 bags of debt and sin have been forgiven, canceled, the question is, are we able to cancel and forgive the 100 silver pieces someone might owe us? And can we live free from other people's sin and hurt? Or do we choose to live in the prison of our own bitterness and rage? There's a lot more we could say about forgiveness, but here's what I want you to talk about around the tables. 2 questions. First, Do you find it personally more difficult to forgive or to be forgiven? Think about that a little bit. Do you find yourself able to forgive more easily or able to receive forgiveness more easily? Secondly, what is the difference between forgiveness and justice or consequences? Difference between forgiveness and justice or consequences. So get some coffee, talk around your tables. I'll wrap you up early enough to have our prayer time about 6:50 or 6:52.